If you've got spring fever, Lowe's has the cure. During SpringFest, make your landscape stand out with 3 free bags of Miracle-Gro 3/4 cubic foot garden soil when you buy 3. Plus, get up to 40% off select major appliances to keep clothes, food, and dishes fresh all season long. Our best lineup is here at Lowe's. Valid through 4/22 while supplies last. Selection varies by location. See Lowe's.com for details. Soil offer excludes Alaska and Hawaii.
Listen, all you New Yorkers. Taxi.
Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. I'm economist Steve Moore. Thank you so much for tuning in this weekend. My first guest of the afternoon is a colleague, a friend, a brilliant economic and political analyst at ALEC. You all know ALEC. They represent free market, conservative state legislators around the country, something like 2,000 to 3,000 members, a really invaluable organization to promote good policy around the country. So Jonathan Williams is, well, what is your title, Jonathan? I know you've been with ALEC for a long time. I think you're vice president, or I know you've run the Fiscal Policy Center for years. What is your title over there these days, Jonathan?
Oh, yeah. Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me. It's I'm now president and chief economist at ALEC, and just been a pleasure for all these 19 years now at ALEC to work alongside you and Arthur Laffer on this incredible work that we put together with Rich States, Poor States.
Yeah. So one of the things, people may have heard of ALEC because it had been controversial a number of years ago. Some of the left-wing groups really went after ALEC in a very aggressive way, which I thought was really ironic because the other group that represents state legislators is the National Conference of State Legislators. They are very liberal and they get all their most of their money from state budgets. But you're totally privately funded. You don't take taxpayer money.
Well, right. I mean, it's not something we go out and get appropriations from state governments to operate ALEC operations. This is what's one of the key differential factors there between us and other groups. And we like to practice what we preach with the free market and ask those who care about these ideas of free markets, limited government, and federalism, the ALEC principles, to contribute to ALEC. And that's how we continue to grow as an organization.
How many members do you have?
Yeah, we have about 2,000 members across the state.
That's amazing.
As you said, just Republicans and Democrats, but free market leaning folks that want to make their states better across the board.
And you've got a lot of, when I talked to your president there, Lisa Nelson, who's done an amazing job as well, she says that you have a few hundred former state legislators and members of ALEC who are now in higher office.
Well, that's a great point. A lot of people think of ALEC as a state policy and member organization, but it's more than that in that we do have 114 members of the current Congress who are ALEC alumni members from when they served as state lawmakers and now have moved, I guess, up or down, depending on how you look at it, to Washington, D.C., into Congress. And but no, it's a great story because as you and I were there just this week, Steve, to release the new Rich States, Poor States, we had the whole Utah delegation of Congress. They're all 4 U.S. House members with us. They weren't all ALEC legislators because some of them, of course, weren't legislators, but nonetheless, I mean, bringing these great state-based solutions to Washington, you have to ask yourself the question, why doesn't Washington pay attention to all the success that's happening in the states? And of course, we help connect the dots.
Yeah, you do. And you're a great training ground for great people who then move on to the House, the Senate, maybe governors, and maybe president. I wouldn't be surprised if we have a former ALEC member who is president of the United States one of these days. Okay, so Jonathan, let's get down to it. You just mentioned that you were in Washington this week with a huge number of the Utah delegation. Now, you put together with me and with Art Laffer, we've been doing this for, 16, 17? How many years have we done Rich State, Poor State?
Yeah, that's just 19 now 19. As of this year. Wow. Incredible. We're almost at 2 decades, right? I mean, we started when we were really young, I guess, Steve.
Yeah, right. Well, it's an amazing report. And what we do in Rich States, Poor States, and everybody, you can get that, right, just by going to the ALEC website. You can pull it down. That's
right. ALEC.org and richstatespoorstates.org, which is a great microsite that kind of lets you go way deeper into the weeds on the policy as well.
So the report, basically, folks, it's a good report to look through, and you could just flip through it and see the pictures, but also look at the rankings of your state. I know we have affiliates, Jonathan, throughout the country, everywhere from California through the Midwest and Chicago and St. Louis and Kansas City, and we've got up into Maine and down into Georgia. So we have people listening to the show across the country, and so I'm sure they're very interested in how their states are doing, and we will get that information to you in a minute, folks. So you got to hold on a minute, because I know we'll have a drum roll for that. But this is the most amazing thing about this report, by the way. Tell us how you do it. What are you looking at? Like tax rates, how much they spend, how much they borrow. It's a real kind of pro-taxpayer view of what states should be doing. What are the criteria you use to measure which states are best?
Well, we use 15 different factors that we have equally weighted throughout the course of these 19 years. And there are things like tax rates, which we know obviously matter a ton for why Americans are voting with their feet and going from state to state, why businesses are locating in one location versus another. We look at regulation. We look at labor policy, things like minimum wage and right to work status of the state. We look at overall the size of state government and how big a government is with how many government employees, let's say. All things that matter for economic growth. I mean, you know this better than anybody, Steve. You and Arthur came to us with this idea nearly 2 decades ago to say, wouldn't it be great if we had this tool to help state lawmakers measure themselves versus the other 49? And that's the key, right? Is you have a consistent measurement. The great Peter Drucker would always say the things that you measure, you're going to succeed at improving at, right? Because you know that you're immediately stacking up against all your other states across the country. And states can only get away with so much bad policy. As you know, Steve, with these laboratories of democracy and this idea of federalism, is states can't build walls to keep people in if their policies are bad enough. And that's one of the great things about our report. The other thing I'll mention on the rankings, and this is really, really key for state legislators out there, is we know there's all kinds of different groups that do rankings today. And I think that's generally pretty positive. But the thing about rich states, poor states, above and beyond the fact that all these 15 factors really matter for why some states are growing and some states are losing. The other thing that's so important is that all 15 of those factors are things that the men and women who serve in Harrisburg, in Nashville, in Lansing, in Phoenix, as state lawmakers, they directly control every single year, and they can make changes for better or for worse, depending on how they would like to change their policy environment.
Okay, so let's get down to it then. We will be taking a break in a few minutes, but we can get through some of this, and I'm going to hold Jonathan over to the second segment, because this is so important, folks, and I know we have people listening to this show, probably in about 40 of the 50 states. So let us start with the winner. Who was the big winner this year? Who was number one?
Well, when we were in Washington this week, we had about 40 legislators from the great state of Utah that were with us, including the Senate President and the Speaker of the House. Great free market leaders. They are number one again. And Steve, as you know, this is a story that's not a new story for rich states, poor states. Utah has been number one for all 19 editions of Rich States, Poor States for Economic Outlook. An incredible success story at the top of the rankings.
Well, what do they do?
They've done so many things right.
Yeah. What does just very quickly, what does Utah do right? Why are they number one?
Well, I think in the essence of it is they are good on policy across the board, but they're always looking to improve and not fall behind by standing still, as we say, is always a risk. But they've done a flat tax. They've really gotten to the heart of property tax problems with their truth in taxation law. They've look at the government pensions, the unfunded liabilities that you and I have talked about for a long time. They've gotten to that issue. And there's so many great free market things that they feature, including school choice. I mean, Utah is just an amazing success story.
Who's number two?
Number two is a state that is a state that Tennessee that moved up tremendously last year from 12 to 2. But one of the states, of course, without a personal income tax, something that you've talked about forever, Steve, is one of the very most important things you can do as a state is reduce your personal income tax and eliminate it if at all possible. And Tennessee, of course, where Arthur Laffer resides today after leaving California, as so many Americans have, continues to move the ball forward and just an incredible growth story with all the in-migration and new businesses that they've seen. If you've been to Nashville, anybody recently, the city
booming.
changes every time I go. You almost don't recognize it. It's growing so quickly.
So we're going to take a quick break. Give us the top 5 or 6. And then when we come back, by the way, Jonathan, we're going to have to look at the states on the other side of the spectrum.
Yeah, so you go from there to Idaho, which has tried to keep up with Utah for many years,
right.
Done some great things on regulatory reform. North Carolina, number 4, a great turnaround.
Wow, North Carolina, because I noticed they've had a big migration of people into North Carolina, so it's a good policy state, huh?
It is. And, they are a key state in that they became a flat tax state. They got rid of their death tax under Governor Pat McCrory. And when conservatives took over the legislature, their business tax, as you know, is going to zero on corporate income tax by the end of the decade. And so it's a powerhouse in a very difficult region, competing against states like Florida and Tennessee.
Okay. And just very quickly, who's number 5?
Number 5, Arizona, perennially top 10 state, continues to do very well.
All right. So those are the top 5. Let's just go through it again. We got Utah. We've got North Carolina. We've got Idaho. We've got, is Florida in that top 5? No, they're probably
Florida's top 10. Yes.
Top 10. Okay. All right, folks, when we get back, we're going to talk about the sore thumbs of the states and the states that do it wrong. And unfortunately, one of those states is the state where this show is home to. But we'll be right back. This is the More Money Show. Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. I'm going to finish my conversation with a good friend and a top economist in the country. That is Jonathan Williams with ALEC. If you're not familiar with ALEC, they are one of the top organizations in America, if not the top organizations, dealing with state policy issues, dealing with the state legislators who make the laws, and everywhere from Albany to Sacramento to Springfield, all around the country. So, Jonathan, you were telling us before we took our break that the top state was Utah. I think you said that that you had Tennessee up there near the top of the list, and Arizona and Idaho, and these are states that do it right, including Florida and Texas. I know they're in the top 10. By the way, Tennessee, Texas, and Florida, as you know, Jonathan, all have something in common, which is they have no income tax. That's a huge advantage that they have over the rest of the country. But now let's talk about the sore losers, the ones who just can't seem to get out of the bottom of the barrel. And why don't you give us the state and the country that has the worst economic environment?
Well, and you're right. They've been stuck at the bottom of the barrel for almost every edition of Rich States, Poor States, and that is the state of New York. Not a surprise to any of the listeners. We're based in New York. City,
this is a New York station. This is WABC in New York, but we have affiliates around the country. I mean, it just breaks the heart of a lot of our listeners to hear that New York is, if they've been 50, how many years have they been last?
Oh, I mean, nearly every edition. I think there was 1 or 2 years Bernie Sanders, Vermont, caught them at 50th, and New York promptly got that designation back.
But, Kathy Hochul, the governor, is now saying maybe they should have a new tax on millionaires. That's not going to help. I mean, it just seems like they do so much wrong. And then you've got this crazy mayor of New York City who talks about the warm embrace of socialism. And I don't know if you saw this week that he's talking about spending $30 million to open government-run grocery stores. I mean, this is pretty weird stuff.
Well, it sure is. And, the proof's in the pudding, as we like to say, because you look at how many Americans have voted with their feet away from the state of New York in the last 10 years. And that's nearly 2 million people over 10 years have left New York for one of the other 49 states. And think about the tax revenue that means that leaves. So, I mean, the comments the other day from Governor Hochul, who I believe was giving remarks down in Florida, basically begging businesses to come back into the state of New York because you need the revenue. I mean, give me a break. She's the one that's been at the helm as they've passed the policies that have driven these very entrepreneurs out of the state of New York, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's so true. And now they're talking about raising taxes again. And so I think they want to solidify their status as the worst state in the country with respect to economics. It's sad. Look, I worked at New York for many years. I was at the Wall Street Journal. I love New York City. It's the Empire State, but they just can't seem to get it right. And it's bad, poor leadership that's really caused these problems. Now, is California number 49? Who's 49?
Well, 49 is New Jersey, which is an all-time low for that state as well. They've always been generally in the bottom 5, but New Jersey continues to double down on the tax increase and just spending philosophy. And if there's a common philosophy of the bottom 10 here, Steve, it's the old Reagan line about the liberal view of the economy. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. If it stops moving, subsidize it. Right, and that's exactly how those states try to go about even competing that way by giving out special handouts versus keeping taxes low for everyone.
Yeah, and by the way, one of the things that our buddy Arthur Laffer talks about is that there were, I think, 11 states back in 1970, not so long ago, that have adopted income taxes, including New Jersey, and things just getting worse and worse and worse there. By the way, we have a lot of listeners in Connecticut. What is the ranking of Connecticut?
I'm glad you asked. So they have broken down into the bottom 5 here at number 46. And that's a horrible ranking for a state that, as you know well, up until Washington State's huge economic malfeasance by passing the income tax this year. Connecticut had been the most recent state to adopt a state income tax in the 1990s and had been one of the most competitive states in the country before that. And here we find themselves all the way down in the bottom 5 now.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting because 2 of the richest states in the country, for 200 years were Connecticut and New Jersey, and they're just slipping. They're losing their best people. They're losing their businesses. And of course, New York State was one of the richest states. I mean, they're still high income, but it is slipping away. Now, you mentioned Bernie Sanders. How is Vermont?
Not very much better than New Jersey and New York. Vermont coming in at number 48 this year. They do have a Republican governor there, Phil Scott, who's been trying to make some important reforms. He's got enough in the legislature to back him up on some of his vetoes. So he's been stopping things from getting worse in recent years. And I think there's no surprise that Vermont actually did improve a spot this year up to 48th from 49th because at least they've begun to stop some of the worst of the bleeding.
Well, it's funny that I don't know if it's funny, but it is ironic that Vermont is number 48 because one of my favorite presidents, Calvin Coolidge, I believe was the governor of Vermont. I know he was one of those northeastern states. It was either Vermont or Maine that he was governor at before he became president. And to think of that he was a slasher of taxes, caused the great boom in the 1920s, and it's sort of ironic that now you've got these crazies that are running the state and the legislature. And then what about our friends out on the West Coast, on the left coast there, like the Oregon and California?
Well, just in case anybody was nervous that California wouldn't get mentioned in a negative light here in the bottom 5, California did come in at 47th this year, so in that worst cohort of states. Oregon is quite close to the bottom 10 at number 40. Then, of course, you have states like Rhode Island, Maryland, Hawaii, Maine, and Illinois rounding out the bottom 10. So it's probably not a lot of surprises. Maine has probably done the best of any of those states in terms of kind of the economy because, it's less bad than many of the other states in the Northeast, and it's got a beautiful climate, and people love to go up and vacation and spend time there. But the rest of these states are really hemorrhaging jobs and individuals, people leaving those states, and of course evaporating their tax base at the very same time.
Now, my home state, I'm embarrassed to admit this on air, but my home state right now, I mean, I'm from Illinois. Back then, Illinois, when I was growing up, wasn't so bad. But now I live in Maryland. We have high taxes in Maryland. In fact, I could buy a house in Florida and pay the mortgage just by the money I'd save from not paying income taxes in Maryland. But where does Maryland rank?
Well, yeah, Maryland is in the bottom 10 at 42nd. And so that wasn't always the case. It's a state that continues to raise taxes. And Governor Wes Moore's platform is to really reverse course from Larry Hogan, who gave us, 8-year reprieve from some of the worst of the progressive policies in Maryland. And Wes Moore is unfortunately going back to kind of the liberal basics for Maryland and looking for more ways to raise taxes. And he blew through a massive surplus, as you know, Steve. Governor Hogan has accumulated a massive government surplus, and Governor Moore comes in and has spent that. And now, of course, shortfall means to the progressive left, they just need to go back and ask for more from hardworking taxpayers, unfortunately.
So I wrote one of the chapters in our report, which is called Rich States, Poor States, of which Jonathan Williams was the editor and lead author of that report. And what I said in my chapter, folks, was that what the phenomenon that is going on that we're seeing repeated almost year after year is that these blue states, they have very, very high taxes. People are leaving, as you just said, Jonathan. People are voting with their feet and moving away from the high taxes, and that depletes the tax base of these states like New York and Vermont and Connecticut and New Jersey. So then they have a budget problem, and so instead of cutting the spending, they raise taxes again, and they're in this kind of vicious cycle. And so what states like Florida and Texas and Tennessee and Utah are doing is basically just hemorrhaging the tax base of these states, and yet they keep digging themselves into deeper holes.
Well, they really do. I mean, it's kind of, as Arthur Laffer would like to say, it's not rocket surgery. It's basic economics and budgeting 101 that you can't spend more than you have. And that's, I mean, the key differential, I think, between the states at the top is they're growth oriented. They keep spending limited. It allows them to cut taxes more, become more growth oriented, and they have that positive cycle at the top. And then you have that vicious cycle at the bottom of higher taxes drives out the tax base, which then has deficits and then higher taxes. I mean, if you had to summarize rich states, poor states, and how these groups of states really do, in many cases, cluster at the top and the bottom and end up stuck there unless they rethink the way they do business, that's a great way to think about it.
One last question I have about this year's Rich States, Poor States. Which state has made the most progress in terms of improving their policy, and which state has moved in the wrong direction the most?
Well, that's a very important question, and this is a kind of pains me as a University of Michigan fan to admit this, but it's the Buckeye State that's the real comeback story in Ohio.
Oh, really?
And and they just were the big winners in this year's edition of the report, moving up 10 spots just this year from 25th to 15th, and that was because of the flat tax that they just put into law. This is the first tax year that it's effective, and Steve, you know what the rate is? It's only 2.75%.
That's amazing.
Under 3% flat tax. And when we started in the first edition of Rich States, Poor States, when they had a Democrat governor, it was a very different state politically, as we know, back in 2007. Ohio was at 47th for economic outlook. So they've gone from 47th all the way up to 15th in this current edition. So they get the big award for the turnaround story.
And which was the word? Which lost the most ground?
Well, two I'd like to mention. One is here in the Commonwealth of Virginia on the other side of the Potomac River, which I used to call the freedom-loving side of the Potomac in Virginia. I'm afraid that we are going to become Maryland South here very soon under Governor Spanberger. I think the Committee to Unleash Prosperity had a very good ad I saw recently on the Spanberger tax increases, and calling out that as just economic lunacy. There's been efforts to try to repeal right to work. So here it was not many years ago. Virginia was number 3 in Rich States, Poor States. Today, Virginia is now really all the way down at below average, pushing the 30s in Rich States, Poor States. And then Colorado was once upon a time number 2 in Rich States, Poor States, and now has fallen this year dramatically and is now at its all-time worst ranking of 29th for economic outlook.
Well, Jonathan, those are states that need to get back on the right track. Again, to just tell you the headline of this report, folks, New York State has again come out the worst state for business, for economic development. And if you want to pay high taxes, move to New York. If you want to stop paying high taxes, get out of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Jonathan Williams, thanks so much for joining on a Saturday. And we will be right back, folks. This is The More Money Show.